Welcome to the People Are People podcast, life lessons learned in real time. I am your host, Lexi Mahari. Thank you for taking the time to give your ears over to my personal thoughts about life, people, and the lessons each one has to offer. So, in today's episode, we are adding another installment to our Great Resignation Series, and we're going to be focusing on your resignation checklist. That's right, folks. You need a checklist if you are about to leave your job. It doesn't matter if you have one lined up or if you really don't know what you're going to do, if you're going off into the world to quote, find yourself, or maybe you're starting your own business. You have to have a resignation checklist handy and ready to go. This will save you a whole lot of headache and potentially heartache by preparing in advance. So, I was scouring the web. That's my thing. I Google it, I YouTube it, I look for all kinds of resources to get a sense of, what the best approach is going to be to practically any scenario. I kind of formulate my own opinion based on my own personal experiences. And then, of course, try to locate some credible sources to get a sense of, what's the best approach going to be in a particular scenario. So, so the first thing you're going to want to do is to write your resignation letter. When resigning, you've got to have a formal resignation letter handy and ready to go. This is one of the ways that, not only your boss is going to realize that this is a legitimate resignation that you're handing in, but it's also a way that your company, your organization, that's how they also go about tracking formally that statement or that decision that you are making to leave the company. Now, there's a lot of divergence of opinion on what I'm about to say, but another tip that goes with the resignation letter is that you should actually inform your boss of your intent to resign in person, or if you're working virtually, via your virtual meeting or on the phone or whatever the case may be. There are some recommendations that you want to avoid just giving a letter because it can also seem very detached, right? Particularly if you have a good relationship, a good working relationship with your boss. Now, let's face it, if you are kind of walking on eggshells and, perhaps you don't have the greatest working relationship with your boss, then a letter may be just fine. But if you have a fairly decent working relationship, you want to make sure that you inform them, first and then provide the written communication. Now, ideally, if you have a really good working relationship with your boss, they should have some insight to the fact that you are either looking for another job, maybe that you have reached a decision that your current position may not be the end all for you in your career path or just your life journey in general. So, ideally, it shouldn't be a surprise to them that you're leaving if you have a good working relationship. But again, experts are saying that it's ideal if you have the conversation before you actually give the letter. Now, I'll give you an example. I do agree with that. Again, if you have a good working relationship with your boss, years ago, I had an employee let me know, probably, I want to say 6 to 8 months in advance, that she was planning to retire. And so her communication to me was that she and her husband had been talking for a while, and given her age and where she was in her career, where she and her husband were financially, and where they were in age, they were finally kind of at a place where she was looking at retiring, and it was highly likely that she was going to do so within the next 6 to 9 months. So she wanted to do me the courtesy of giving me a heads up that that was coming. And so fast forward a few months later, I want to say 6 months later, she gave me 30 days notice to say, you know what, remember that conversation we had? Yeah, me and my husband have decided that we are ready to take that step and I'm going to retire. So it actually was a very, I thought, courteous way, high class way to go out. She didn't just kind of drop the ball with a 2 weeks notice. She gave a very lengthy, far in advance notification. Now, there is nothing wrong with 2 weeks notice, and that kind of brings us to the next tip. You should, at a minimum, the standard is to give 2 weeks notice so that your manager or your boss, they have an opportunity to start making preparations for your exit. And typically, preparations for an exit may entail transitioning your duties. It may include you having to upskill somebody or train them on what it is you do. They may have an opportunity to backfill your position, meaning they can start recruiting early. So, ideally, you do want to give at least 2 weeks' notice. There's nothing wrong with that. But if you're comfortable enough to give more advance notice, I think that's a good way to go. I am not going to sugarcoat it and say that every leader or boss will be receptive to your more than 2 weeks notice. I definitely am aware of some people who sometimes, unfortunately, assume the worst of people. And if you do give a 30-day notice, they may question your commitment to the company and exactly what it is you're going to be doing over those 30 days, especially if you're not tied to a project that is sensitive, or maybe the foot is on the pedal and they're pushing hard to achieve some extraordinary outcome. You can sometimes run into some challenges with some bosses, so it's understandable why there might be some hesitancy. But I just say, I think a good rule of thumb as well is to aim for the 2 weeks notice. If you can give more, give a little bit more leeway. Now, speaking of, transitioning your duties, depending on your role, you may have to be prepared to provide your boss with some information as relates to, who it is you might transition your duties to, or who you might recommend that you transition your duties to and why. So be prepared to have that conversation, in good faith. Uh, in your heart of hearts, you may feel like it's really not your worry anymore. You're leaving the organization, but just as a act of good faith, you do want to be prepared to have that conversation and to assist in any way that you can. And that brings me to the next tip, ironically enough, or interestingly enough, and that is that you do want to leave on a good note. Again, if you're not someone who is in a corrective action or performance improvement state, but you are in good standing, you want to, maintain that good standing and give what you can give. Ideally, that is 100% on your way out the door. It's very easy to get short timer's disease, and your brain is already in your next location of work if you're going to a new organization, or your heart is already, embedded in your new business that you're starting, your new business venture. But you always want to put forth your best effort and support that company on the way out the door. You never know if you're going to one day try to come back, or if perhaps your path is going to cross with someone again in the future. So you definitely want to just give 100% on the way out the door. And I know that may be difficult to do, but do what you can. Now, the next tip on the list is that you want to be careful not to share the news of your exit with your coworkers or anyone else that might cross paths with your leader or your boss prior to you having had that conversation with them about your resignation. And that is because you do want to make sure that if they have time, right, to prepare for that announcement. If you are in a role where, your job duties are significant, or work is going to have to be reassigned, maybe there won't be a backfill coming for some time, you want to give your boss time to be able to make that announcement, and also share what the plan will be. What is the mitigation for your exit? How will your exit impact or affect the other workers? Because that's going to be the thing your peers are thinking about. Well, what does this mean for me? Particularly if you had a heavy load, where is your work going to go? So you want to give your boss, in all honesty, the courtesy of being able to present your exit in a way that the team can be a little more receptive to it. Of course, if you're well liked, you're going to be missed, but they also are going to be thinking about the short term and long term impact of your exit. So try to hang in there. Try not to spill the beans too soon as relates to your intention to exit the company. The other thing you want to do is to try to exit on a good note. I kind of alluded to this by repeatedly stating that you want to give 100%. You do want to keep everything as positive as you can. Again, if you've already got a tenuous relationship, I recognize that this may be difficult to do, but do what you can. Again, because you don't know where your paths might cross. You don't want to give your boss any excuse not to rate you as eligible for rehire. It's not that you're planning to come back, you know, but you never know who you're going to meet up with later, particularly if you are going to remain in the industry that you're in. I've learned that the world is really small, and you just never know whose path you're going to cross again, whether it's your boss or someone that maybe you worked with. They're going to remember how you left the company and how your exit affected them and what your attitude was. Because sometimes people's real personality really comes through in those final days and weeks. So the next thing on our checklist is going to be looking at our benefits. So I believe I alluded to this in the first installment of the Great Resignation Series, where I talked about, my personal goals of wanting to ensure that I had a plan with, medical benefits, uh, you know, dental benefits, vision benefits. You're going to want to make sure that you have a clear strategy for what's going to happen after you resign and you leave the company. Some companies, or I think most companies, do offer Cobra as an option when you're resigning, in which you have to pay the premium and the administrative fees that are associated with that insurance. But so again, you're going to want to make sure you're going to have the money for that. What is your plan for covering those costs? Making sure again that you have adequate medical, dental, vision, whatever other forms of insurance that you need to have. You're going to want to make sure that those things are still going to be available to you in some capacity. Unfortunately, we don't always know what the future holds when it comes to health and wellness. So you definitely want to make sure that you take every effort to, ensure that you've got the appropriate services in place. The next thing on your checklist should be looking at your 401k and making some decisions about what you're going to do with those funds. Are you going to let them stay where they are with the current company that they're with? Are you going to roll them over into your new company's 401k? Perhaps you might look at rolling it over into your IRA. You're going to want to have some thoughts about, what you're going to do with that money. The same is true for HSA accounts. If you have some type of HSA account that you're able to take with you, you're going to want to think about, what you're going to do with that as well. Are you going to leave it where it is, or are you going to roll it over into your new HSA? The other thing you're going to want to think about is your paid time off balance or sick leave balance. So, organizations have their own policies and practices when it comes to this particular area. So there are times where there are instances where companies may allow you to use your time before you go. Some companies will restrict how much you're able to get paid as it relates to any, unused paid time off. So, for example, some companies only pay you pennies on the dollar for your PTO balance. Some companies will give you a lump sum payment, and others will implement or institute the use it or lose it clause. So you definitely want to be thinking about whether or not you need to burn up some of your paid time off before you turn in your resignation letter. Do the math. Take a look at what works best for you before you turn in your resignation letter. There have been instances I know of some peers, management peers from my past, who denied paid time off for people who were looking to, just kind of burn through some of their PTO before they left the company. In all fairness, sometimes, again, if you are tied to a significant project, with a spotlight that's shining on it and they need your expertise before you go, you're definitely at risk for not getting to use that time. So you always want to make sure, again, you're kind of thinking ahead about, what am I going to do? Am I going to burn through this? Am I going to take the lump sum? What's my strategy before you turn in that paperwork? Now, the other thing you might want to think about doing is getting your letters of reference.